So here are the top 5 most legit alien abductions, in my opinion. Before we get started, if you're into hearing about strange and mysterious stories that make you say, wait, what? This is your channel. Subscribe, like, comment, come back every week for a new video. And also any recommendations I make on this video, there will be a link in the description if you want to deep dive into any of these topics yourself. Okay, let's start with number 1. Granger Taylor. In November 29, 1980, Granger Taylor left a note for his parents, and it said, "Dear Mother and Father, I've gone away to walk aboard an alien spaceship, as recurring dreams assured a 42-month interstellar voyage to explore the vast universe, then return. I am leaving behind all my possessions to you. I will no longer require the use of any. Please use the instructions in my will as a guide to help you. Love, Granger." And this was really strange, but not completely off the wall. And that was because Granger was a little bit of a local celebrity. He was eccentric and a mechanical genius. He once rebuilt an entire World War II Kitty Hawk plane. It ended up being in a museum. And he got really, really fascinated with UFOs and building UFOs, to the point where he actually built a life-size UFO ship in his backyard. And he started telling his friends that he was dreaming about UFOs and that aliens were actually communicating with him. And a lot of his friends said he was taking acid. I know what you're probably saying. That explains it right there. But if you think about it, a lot of people say that psychedelics are kind of a way to open up your third eye and open you up to communication from another spirit, parallel worlds, aliens. Granger started becoming more and more obsessed with aliens. And in the last few months, he told his friends that he was invited on the trip to the Milky Way galaxy and that he needed to pick a rainy night so that the ship could hide from onlookers. And when he finally did leave, the last time he was seen was at Bob's Grill. It was a diner. Waitress said he was wearing casual attire, no coat. He left the diner at 6:30 in his Datsun truck, and he was never seen again. A search was conducted, and they couldn't find his truck until 6 years later. So in 1986, they found fragments of his truck in the forest and it looked like it had blown up. And this kind of tracked because he had dynamite in his truck, and he would use it sometimes when he would go into the forest to clear the brush. They also found fragments of bone, although they couldn't authenticate whether or not this was Granger Taylor's bones, because DNA testing was kind of in its infancy at that time. And while we could probably test it now, they can't find the bones that they found on the scene that day. So somebody dropped the ball on that one. So did he blow himself up? Probably, but I don't know. There's just something about Granger that makes me think he might be up there. And I hope if he's living up there, he's living his best spaceman life. Number 2. David Huggins. David Huggins was 72, and they did this documentary with him. He seems like a normal dude. He goes to work and he paints. But what he paints primarily are aliens and these scenes of abduction and scenes of being taken. And he is saying that these are scenes from all the years that he has been abducted by aliens. And David is from Georgia. He grew up with his mom, dad, and his sister. And the first time at the age of 8, he had his strange experience with these beings. The first one was on his farm. He was collecting arrowheads. He heard a voice behind him say, "David, behind you." And he saw a hairy creature with bright eyes behind him. And he said for a split second, he felt like he was looking through the creature's eyes and looking at himself, which completely freaked him out. And he ran back to the house, and the creature disappeared into the woods. And then later, he had another experience where he said he felt like he saw something in the brush watching him. Next thing he knows, he fainted, and then he's curled up in a fetal position. When he wakes up, there's a lot of little grays surrounding him. He hears 3 beeps, and he wakes up. This happens well into adulthood. He even says at the age of 16, he loses his virginity to an alien being. And he claims that he was taken on a ship and showed these children that were apparently half him. It's an insane story, but what I think makes it legit is, unlike some people who tell fantastical stories, David Huggins keeps pretty much to himself. When he talks about it, he doesn't exaggerate, he doesn't make wild assumptions. It seems like he's literally a guy who had this experience. And the big kicker for me is that he doesn't seem to be in it for money or fame. He works at a deli, he lives in a tiny apartment by himself. In fact, if you watch the documentary Love and Saucers, when he did share it with his wife, it basically ruined his marriage. And there's a lot of testimony from his friends, his boss, his son, and they all believe him. It's pretty trippy. Number 3, Travis Walton. Most of you probably already know this story. It's amazing of how Travis Walton was abducted by aliens, but there were witnesses who saw it happen in front of them. That's very rare. So 1975, Wednesday, Travis Walton and 7 of the guys he was working with in the National Apache Sitgreaves National Forest, they're going home and they see this bright light in the forest. They drive towards it and all the other guys are scared. But Travis had this kind of urgency to see the craft at close range. So basically the last thing that they saw was him, being hit by this beam of light and his body going backwards, and then he gets blown off, and then they drive off. When they try to come back for him, they didn't find him for days. They tried to tell people, and the media ridiculed them and almost accused them of being responsible for Travis Walton's disappearance. A few days later, Travis Walton wakes up on a dark road, and he says he saw the saucer above him and it took off into the sky silently but quickly. Travis calls his sister. His brother-in-law answers. His brother-in-law, Dwayne, came, and Travis was found at 12:05 a.m. At first, he thought he was only gone for a couple hours until his brother told him, feel your face, dude. He had a full beard. Then his brother and his brother-in-law broke the news to him that he had been gone for 5 days. I think this is legit because where did he go for 5 days? They couldn't find him anywhere. There was no trace of him. And why would 5 ordinary, hardworking guys talk about UFOs to the authorities? If something bad happened, why wouldn't they just say, oh, he got lost or whatever, instead of doing the UFO story and being ridiculed and interrogated for hours? And then when Travis came back and was put under hypnosis, what he remembered was detailed, and he was physically stressed and scared. So Travis Walton had since been on several podcasts, and he sticks to his story every time. Number 4, Betty and Barney. This was the first well-documented abduction. This was the first abduction I had ever read about, was Betty and Barney Hill, the OG of all alien abduction stories, and probably one of the most believable. One of the reasons it's so believable is because Betty and Barney Hill, they were just a regular couple living in New Hampshire. Barney worked at the U.S. Postal Office, and Betty was a social worker. And what made them a little bit different was that they were an interracial couple in the 60s. Very uncommon. Barney was African American and Betty was white. Anyways, they were on their way home from a vacation in Canada, passing through the White Mountains on their way back to New Hampshire, and they had planned on driving straight through the night because they were short on money. They didn't want to get a hotel room, and the highway was really dark and empty except for their car. Betty was the first one to notice a bright star in the sky, thinking maybe it was a planet. But as they kept going, she said she was startled when she saw another star or planet appear. She didn't say anything to Barney until the bright planet or star or whatever started getting bigger and bigger. And she thought that it appeared to be following their car, and it was changing course. It was super erratic. And she finally told Barney about it, and he was just like, it's just a satellite or a plane that had maybe gone off course. But soon he started to get nervous because the bright light got closer and closer. It made him even more nervous because it had no sound at all. Betty told Barney to stop the car so they could take a closer look. And they stopped at this picnic area. So Betty had binoculars, and she was looking through it and saw that it was an oddly shaped craft with multicolored lights. Barney realized, that's not a plane, and he went back into the car. And they realized the object seemed to be tracking them, and after a while, it started coming towards their vehicle and hovered directly in front of them. The Hills claimed to have heard rhythmic series of beeping or buzzing sounds that kind of seemed to bounce off the truck of their vehicle. The car vibrated, They both felt a tingling sensation and said that their brains felt dulled. Then, like a few more beeping and buzzing noises, they regained consciousness. And then they later found out they had traveled 35 miles south, but they only had really spotty memories of that section of the road. The couple was later interviewed and had not realized that their 4-hour trip had turned into a 7-hour trip. When they got home, their watches had stopped and completely broke. The leather strap of the binoculars was torn, but Barney couldn't remember tearing it. The toes of his dress shoes were scraped. Betty noticed that her dress was torn at the hem, the zipper and the lining. She also noted a pinkish powder on her dress. There were shiny concentric circles on the car's trunk that had not been there in previous day. And they experimented with a compass, and they noticed when they put the compass near the spots, it would just whirl rapidly, and then when they would move it away, it would stop. In 1963, the couple went under hypnosis. This is when they started to remember all those details they forgot. Why do I think it's legit? Well, this, again, one of the first alien abductions that really had a lot of people interested. Unfortunately, throughout the years, their story's been picked through and overanalyzed, and, little details change, and automatically people want to jump on the fact that it didn't happen. But for me, it has a lot to do with the people involved. I mean, these two, again, seemingly well-educated couple, they would have zero reasons to lie. And of course, details will change here and there, but overall, their story is the same. In 1961, an interracial couple was already something they had to deal with. Why on earth would they pile on seeing UFOs on top of it? I suggest reading The Interrupted Journey to get all the details of the story. And again, link is in the description, but a must read is called Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience. Such a legit experience. I completely believe Betty and Barney. Number 5, The Andresen Affair. I cannot shut up about this book. I mean, where do I even begin? I actually didn't read it. I was listening to it as an audiobook. I highly recommend listening to the audiobook because it is absolutely captivating. It was subject to a 12-month intensive investigation for the Center of UFO Studies that involved recording a lot of the testimonies under hypnosis, lie detector tests of the witnesses, detailed analysis, cooperative circumstantial evidence, character checks, comparisons with other accounts, etc., etc. They really went through the ringer. So what happened with the Andresens? Well, Betty Ann Andresen was married to James Andresen. They had 7 children. In mid-January, Betty's husband James was in the hospital, and the whole family, her parents, were there with her to help with kids, and they were all home. It was evening, and they were watching TV, and Betty was in the kitchen cleaning up. Then the lights began to flicker and blinked out. The house was dark, and of course the kids are scared, and they run into the kitchen to get their mom. And at this time, they're seeing a pink light shining through the kitchen window. And the next thing they remember is they wake up in bed, and it's the next day. The following years, Betty remembered having an experience, but it was all kind of hazy, so she didn't know if it was a dream or whatever, but she kept thinking about it. She had mental flashbacks, these scenes of, being talked to by strange beings. She would remember it momentarily and then completely forget about it. In 1974, she saw that the National Enquirer was asking for first-hand UFO accounts. So she wrote in, and at the time, the Betty and Barney Hill story had already came out with their experience. And in that same thing, they didn't remember a lot, just like Betty, until they went under hypnosis. Betty went under hypnosis, so did her daughter. I mean, there was so much. Basically, they were not only taken on the ship, but Betty remembers the entire experience, where they examined her. They showed her into a different area where she felt like she met God or a higher being. It's absolutely crazy. The parts of the audiobook where she's being put under hypnosis, the details that she describes, like how they look, what they said to her. And at one point, Betty was so out of sorts when they came in, she offered them something to eat. I mean, what a hostess, right? So that's it, you guys. That's the top 5 most legit alien abductions. Again, all the books I've recommended and the shows are in the description. Let me know if you read or listen to them and tell me what you think. See you next week.